Hi, thanks everyone, and thanks for sticking around on such a lovely day. I know we've all been missing the sun, and thank you to Karen for such a really important talk. A lot of it resonated with me, and especially the co-production, the collaboration. I find in my work too, I think it's really important that we don't have a fragmentation of work and research, but that we work together. So I'm going to be the one more talking about the existential crisis of the robot that Karen mentioned there. But yeah, what I'm also going to be talking about in these next 20 minutes or so is a cross-sector project on the responsible use of generative AI, but it's more than generative AI really in social care. So in a nutshell, how do we use AI ethically and responsibly in social care services? So maybe before I start, I should probably give you a really brief introduction to what we are at the Institute for Ethics in AI. Don't worry about reading all of this. The Institute for Ethics in AI is part of the Faculty of Philosophy at Oxford University, and we're a very interdisciplinary team of people there, philosophers, lawyers, and so on, working on different issues in ethics in AI. And I actually come from a social care background. Some of my colleagues are sitting here I used to work with at King's College London, and it's nice to see them. So I brought in the social care research into the Institute for Ethics in AI, and that's what I'm doing now next to my administrative job as a director of research. So before I go into the actual research, I just want to briefly define what AI is. And it's taken me a while to boil it down to that. But what AI really is, it refers very broadly to systems that make predictions based on a large amount of data that they've been trained on. So whether you're looking at self-driving cars, those are systems that have been trained on traffic, on road signs, and so on. Whether you're looking at systems to detect cancer, that will have been trained on loads of data on cancerous lesions. And if you're looking at large language models, which are powering ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, and the like, those have been trained with a lot of data from the internet. So basically what people have written. So that's really what they are. If we're then looking at what responsible AI means, this is also a term and concept that's being used in different ways. There are different approaches to it. One of the common ones is how tech developers are developing AI, how they're looking whether these systems are actually aligned with what's important to us humans. But then also responsible AI from a more political, contextual point of view, and that's how we are working with the concept, meaning that AI is something that's coming into our contexts that are political, that are social, where power dynamics are already in place. And there's nothing new, right? We've got all of these contexts. AI is something new now that's landing within that. And we need to see AI in context and in the context that we're using these systems. And that's particularly important in social care contexts, in which we often have these power dynamics, in which is such a big ecosystem of policymakers, of people providing care, of people with experience of care services, and so on. So that's how we are working with this concept of responsible AI. And this is why co-production is so important, because co-production as a method, for example, action research, is really also working with these power dynamics, making sure that people, as Karen also said, are meeting each other on an equal basis. Doesn't matter whether you're a care home resident, a care provider, a tech provider, policymaker, you're all coming together and trying to pull on the same string. So that's really important, and that's what we've been trying to achieve. So who is we? What we've been calling the Oxford Project on Responsible AI in Social Care is something that's co-hosted with me at the Institute for Ethics in AI, Katie Thorne, who may be online from the Digital Care Hub, which is a charity supporting care providers, if you don't know that charity, with information and advice and so on technology use, and Daniel Casson, who's been working as a consultant in this field for a really long time. And we came together a few years ago. Just online, we met and we said, we all have an interest in AI. What are you seeing from your work where people are already using it? How do you perceive people actually, in care contexts having challenges or also benefiting from it already? And what kind of regulations are already out there? And what Katie, the Digital Care Hub has actually got a telephone line. What they've been finding is back then already that people were calling them up and saying, I'm a care worker, I'm using ChatGPT for my work. Is this allowed? Is this okay? And since then, we've seen a lot of more use cases from AI in various systems in care contexts. So commonly, people are using it for meeting summarization and drafting documents. You may have heard that's also common in GP practices already, or in social work with something called magic notes. And there was just Ada Lovelace Institute has just released a brilliant report about that. Chatbots are commonly being used for all sorts of things: recruitment, occupancy management, but also asking some of the questions that Karen was just talking about. For example, mouth care. When care workers don't really know what they want to do in a particular situation, they might be using these systems such as ChatGPT on their phone. We are commonly seeing it in all sorts of different research outputs, and I'm sure you've also got that issue when you might be reading something thinking, is this AI generated or not? Or hopefully you don't see that, but I do sometimes. Media creation, data analysis. In the care context, we see pain and wound assessments and fall preventions. And more systems that use surveillance type of technology. I've seen and spoken to a few people now who are using surveillance technology that is then able to monitor people's behavior and are maybe then able to actually already point to, there's something changing. What we're also seeing is the use of chatbots, so these large language models, voice-activated type of systems being used in the care of older people to have them, an activity to chat with these systems. So in all sorts of different ways, we're seeing these systems already. And we felt back then, when Katie and Daniel and I were sitting together, we said, okay, well, this is really interesting, but what's actually out there to support people, to guide them on how to use these systems responsibly? Because there are problems from a technological point of view, there are problems from how we use them. So just to say one example, if you're using ChatGPT, you put people's private data in there to generate a care plan, what you're doing is you are sending their private data out into the world. Now, that's a data privacy issue here, confidentiality, and that's only one of the issues, because all of those of you who may have been using these systems may know that they also sometimes just come up with lies. It may not be a good practice, whatever you might be generating there. So there are lots of issues from a technical point of view, but also how people are using them. Let's also briefly look at where things are going. It's a really fast-moving field. AI technology is constantly evolving. And often I get asked, well, what do you see the future trajectory of AI in social care? I mean, care robotics, that's something, we are seeing already abroad quite a bit. In Japan, for example, that then has AI systems integrated that talk to somebody, again, able to, pick up on any kind of changes in behaviors. We'll see more integrated care combining systems. This is all really exciting, but I always think it's actually we live in the now, and it's the now that really matters. And what we're doing together now will decide what the future will look like. And I think there is a huge potential in AI, and we see a lot of excitement in the sector, in policy, and so on for AI and technology to be kind of a panacea, or at least, some solution to some of the many issues we are seeing in social care. But I think this really needs to be evidence-based. Again, also moving on from what Karen said here, we need to know of whether the outcomes we're trying to achieve can actually be met through this type of technology. And importantly, what is it actually about here? It's about well-being, it's about quality of life, it's about good care. And can AI really help us with that or not? And this is what we can decide and we can work on together right now. And that's what makes the future. So let's go on to this project and how it then came about. So after that famous call that I've already told you about now, we decided to convene a group of people from the care sector at Oxford University, in one of the colleges, for a roundtable. So that was around a year and a half ago. And people came, and we had a day together where we really made sense of generative AI specifically. So we asked people, how are you seeing the use of it? What's missing right now to you? And one of the things that they really flagged up was, well, we don't actually know from the Department of Health and Social Care or the Care Quality Commission or so on, are we allowed to use these systems? Are we allowed to use ChatGPT? What does this actually mean for regulation of care? We need more clarity around that. So we then we wrote up a statement which we published online. And some of the statements in the statement was, we urgently need to develop a shared co-produced framework to underpin the responsible use of generative AI in adult social care. And what we mean by that is that we need a really stable value foundation that we can build on, and that doesn't move even if AI moves, right? It's something that is our North Star to deciding of what responsible AI in adult social care actually looks like. And this was then endorsed by, I think, 35 or so organizations, and people kept on joining this collaboration. So in the end, we had around 150 active collaborators coming from people with lived experience of care, working with TLAP, who you may know, Think Local Act Personal, part of Skills for Care, the care workers charity. So care workers, we had lots of different care providers, care provider organizations, importantly also tech providers, because they need to be around the table too, and policymakers. And we kicked off this collaboration, which worked in such a way that we had a steering group meeting every month, and everybody was invited to this. So anyone who said, this is really interesting and I want to join it, was invited to the steering group online. We formed 5 working groups, which were actually all by people of their own experience. So we had a care workers working group, we had a care providers working group, people with lived experience, and so on. And these groups came together to make sense for themselves of what AI means to them and what it is that they need in this whole space right now to feel happy and safe to use it or have it used in their care. And the working groups themselves then came up with their own products, depending on what they felt they want to share with the world. So the care workers, for example, came to Oxford again for an in-person day, and they created a statement for policymakers and their employers in which they said, look, we don't really feel trained at the moment to use these systems. We often use them on our own phones. We shouldn't have to do this. And also, where's the liability here? So if you're wanting us to use any AI systems and something goes wrong, you have to tell us who's liable. So that's something they said to their employers through that statement. And the people with lived experience too came up with their own vision of how they want AI to be used in their care or not. And all of these documents are available under the Digital Care Hub, and I'll share later a code, and then you can find them there, because we felt that hosting them on the Digital Care Hub will then also open it up more to the world rather than anywhere else. What followed that kind of co-production, well, that wasn't actually really first the co-production, that was the working group. But what then followed that is that we put all of these documents I just told you about onto one table, and we brought all the collaborators together, and we created a space for deliberation, where we really said, okay, what's important for me as a care provider, what's important for you as a person with lived experience, and what kind of document can we now create together and deliberate on that we want to share with the world. And that's something we then did last year at the Care Summit. We called it the Care Summit, which was a 2-day event at Oxford. The first day was a day for the collaborators to come together and deliberate on, first of all, our definition on the responsible use of AI in social care, and I'll go back to this in a second, but also a co-produced AI guidance, which is now available. So let's go back to the definition, because as I said, this is really the bedrock of what we're building on now to define what responsible AI means in social care. And so the definition is the responsible use of AI means that the use of AI systems in the care related to the care supports and does not undermine, harm, or breach fundamental values of care, human rights, independence, choice and control, dignity, equality, and well-being. And what this really does is that it centers responsible AI and the use and the decisions we're making around that really on the care of people and what we value. And this value framework that's also already underlying the regulation of good care anyway, right? And this is quite different to some of the narratives that are actually driving the use, the development, and the adoption of AI in social care right now, which may be more around effectiveness or somebody else's priorities, not those of people who are drawing on care and providing it. The AI guidance is something where people define together 12 domains that are really important to them, that they are really concerned about when it comes to the use of AI in care. Those include choice and control, for example, training, data privacy, accountability. And co-production is always a theme here, where everybody always agreed we need to have co-production in all of this, whether it's the development of AI or the evidence gathering. So it's something we want to continue to have in there. And then per domain, we produced a guidance which is based on the I and we statements, which is also part of the CQC's assessment framework. And then we defined what it actually means to people. So for example, as people who draw on care and support, when it comes to improving care, I want to be confident that the technologies used in my care and support are designed to enhance and improve my care and to prioritize my well-being. So this guidance is also available, and we are further refining it all the time since we published it. But I often think in my work, it's really important to have this foundation. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty of actually deciding on how to use AI in care in a practical level, sometimes that doesn't help us enough. There's more that we need to think about. And there's also more around the issue of, do we need more regulation? Is there actually a gap in there? Because if you're looking at the health and social care regulations as they stand right now, technology is only mentioned under safe environments, very minimally. So do we not need to put a bit more flesh to that, because AI and technology more broadly is becoming such an important part of the care ecosystem? And this is something, I'm seeing other sectors too. My husband told me off for this analogy. I was quite pleased with generating that, right? The washing machine with the dishwasher. Like, we all know that a dishwasher is there a washing machine is there to wash our clothes. And we could theoretically put dishes in it, but we don't, because, yes, they might be clean at the end, but they will also be broken. Now, I think this is quite a good analogy because, with things like, and I always take ChatGPT just as one example, even though it might be able to do something in theory, it doesn't mean that we should be using it in practice. But I think we're also still in the space, especially in social care, some people we work with who don't really know yet what they should be using it for and what could be broken. And that's something we still really need to work together. So what does this mean? Of course, we're building on the values and principles of adult social care, but we also now really need more work on examining how AI, the uses of AI, interrelate with regulation and understanding of good practice. We need to keep exploring how developments in other sectors are also becoming relevant for social care. And here we could borrow, the whole debates around digital human rights, and, for example, a right to a human decision. This is really important in social care contexts. And then also we need to then, of course, adjust good practice, and we need to do this quickly, because that's also people are using it every day right now, and often they just don't really know how to use it properly. So it's really important work. I really briefly want to tell you of a few examples that I have seen and I've been finding really tricky to get my head around from my own research interviewing care providers. And maybe I'll only be able to get through one of them. But I think the first one is really interesting, just to highlight how difficult these decisions sometimes are of whether a use of an AI is ethical or not, and how to do it. So I remember talking to a care provider who has a care home resident who lives with schizophrenia and a learning disability. And that care provider was really excited because they said, look, we put an AI and voice chatbot into that person's room. And that voice chatbot created a new persona, an alien that has outer-worldly medicine. And this person living with schizophrenia doesn't believe in worldly medicine, right? And so now they're really excited to have this alien they can talk to and provide them with outer-worldly medicine. And it's just feeling really happy about that and really excited about that. So the care provider is also really happy about that. Now, you could say, and also looking into some of the literature and so on around mental health and how to support people, you could say, okay, well, if the outcome is that somebody is feeling better, then that's great. But now let's just switch around. Would we, in a care context, have someone as a person sit in there and talk to somebody with schizophrenia, pretending that they're an alien with outer-worldly medicine? No. Probably not. So this raises quite a lot of issues. There's a safeguarding issue, because if you're just using an open chatbot, and we've seen really sad cases, it could actually turn to, it's saying, oh, you should commit suicide because you're not worth anything. This is something that could happen, right? Would we then want to say, well, but what if the system has been specifically built for this purpose? Would then that be any more ethical or not? So this is really tricky. And another way that we could think of voice-activated chatbots is, of course, we get them in these care bots that sometimes look really cute, walking through care homes. I also know of some that are being developed in Germany, for example, that have a nice little chat with the care home residents. Is that any different to, for example, watching TV? Because there you've also got people playing out something, right? But then I think often it feels a bit heavy for people. Like, is it really dignified to have a chatbot chat with you? What are some of the broader issues that we want to look at here? Is it about loneliness? It's about keeping people entertained. And in the end, it's also about person-centered care. And I think these questions are really, really difficult to unpick sometimes. And together, especially with people with lived experience of this and care workers and so on, this is where we need to make the decisions, and where we might also really need some good practice guidance here, so that everybody knows, okay, this is how we should be using this technology, and this is where there are some red lines, also regarding the values that we're trying to protect. So the next steps of our work is we've continued this work, and I've been really heartened by how much people want to continue to be part of this collaboration, because people feel, that is something that's really important, and it doesn't matter what their background or experience is or so, they want to create something together. And that's been really heartening to see, because I work with some other sectors where you can believe me, it's not the same at all. And I've walked into rooms and I thought, oh, everyone is going to work together nicely, and, we're going to be able to do something like the Oxford project here. And no, not at all. So it's been really nice to see, really heartening to see that from a social care perspective, we can work together like this. Oh, sorry, I'm nearly done. And the next steps are that we are establishing an alliance on AI and social care, which we want to be a community of good practice, where we draw on all the different evidence that's now being already generated, some of the good practice guidance that's being generated. But we also want it to be a space where people can have open conversations about this and feel safe, and then also create projects within that, whether that's producing new good practice, whether that's maybe also looking at some of the regulatory needs or so. So that's what we'll be doing next. And we'll have our next Care Summit in Oxford on the 26th of March, which will be again very much like last year. I hope so, because it was a nice summit. So I hope again that we'll be having it like this. Please do join us if you've got time. And thanks very much. I'm sorry for being over time.
Does anyone want to ask any questions?
Can you hear me? There we go. Thank you. That was a fascinating talk. I'll apologize. My question is quite a big question. Obviously, AI is as you've highlighted, a vast range of technologies. Thinking of LLMs specifically, the current options on the market, as it were, are invariably controlled by very large corporations, mostly headed by very wealthy men who are mostly American and who quite frequently have odd political views. And the technologies themselves sort of divorce knowledge from an individual creator's right to have recognition of having developed that knowledge. Do we, in this room, thinking about the sort of practical ethics of using the tool, do we have a responsibility to go one step further? And are we responsible for decisions about whether we should even use current LLMs within social care, healthcare, the sectors we come from?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question. And, I told you about some of the tech providers that we've been working with us too, and who've been really active in the past year or so, actually creating a pledge themselves by which they want, ethical standards that they want to maintain. And I think that, as people using AI, it is really important to understand the technology that you are using and where it's coming from. And you obviously have, are already informed on where some of these technologies are coming and what the background is. I think specifically for care, so I know there are lots and lots of tools coming onto the market now that have AI integrated in one way or another or so. But I would say it's really important to know from the tech providers on how they are integrating AI, how they are doing it, what are some of the safeguards, well, how are they thinking ethically? Because they are now this really important part of the care ecosystem, and they have got a responsibility, right? And there should also be accountability around that. So I think that that's really important. I would also say, so I'm not very technical at all. I've had to become more technical, of course, but one thing I've been seeing working with some of my technical colleagues is that there are actually a lot of smaller language models now dotted around the place that can do a really good job and often a much better job at some of the things that we would want to see and that could really benefit care. Right. And I think often as people who want to build systems for care, it's difficult to find the type of computer scientists who can actually help us to create these systems using these smaller models, which often you can actually run from your own computer or even your own phone. And that take much less energy, that can be really tailor-made to what it is that we need. And I think this is also where the future is going more, is lots of smaller models and smaller systems that are very focused on what we're trying to achieve with them.
Thank you for your talk. I also have a rather large existential question. What do you see as the impact of AI in social care in terms of inequalities? So, some care homes being able to provide more AI-driven care or less, but also that could be of a detriment. The choice between a robot that provides companionship versus a human care worker who provides some companionship, or a volunteer in the community who provides companionship. Have you had any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think this is a really multi-layered issue, right? And I think there's a lot of potential here in terms of growing inequalities, whether it's the digital divides, where we also say, well, actually AI can also really benefit. So how are we going to make sure that everybody can benefit from what there is to benefit? And how do we pay for this, right? But then we also already know there have been some really interesting studies. So for example, Sam Rickman from the LSE published something on how he tested some of these large language models and local authority like care plans and care notes. And it really highlighted how there is, with some of the models, not all of them, but that basically in a nutshell, women get flagged as having less care needs than men. So yeah, so that's an interesting, but also really terrible study, really. But we know that these systems are really biased. So there are also issues around, the technology and inequalities here. And then you mentioned social isolation and loneliness. Again, I think we as a society need to have a really good conversation and a very deep conversation around how we envisage the future of our society, because we know loneliness and social isolation is an issue. So would we want to build systems where we're saying, okay, well, now this can, make somebody happy for a while because they pretend to be a friend or a long lost love or something like that? Or do we say, well, let's keep on investing in community spaces, in, shared activities, or is there, a really good balance in between? But I think what I find with AI ethics, it always boils down to coming back to what it is that we as humans value. And to be really critical about that, and then make that the basis to build on.
Thank you. Very interesting. In terms of the tech companies that you've worked with, I know you may not be able to reference them by name, but if you can think of them, for example, when they're in the same room at some of the convenings that you've had, what have you learned from them in terms of best practices? What are they doing right? What have they admitted that they have not done right as well? So what are some strategies that we can think about that would help this be, as you said, more ethically implemented within the social care setting. So strategies, and you talked a lot about principles, but if there are any others that those concrete company examples make you think about, I'd be interested in hearing that too.
Yeah, so one of the points that came up often during our work was how co-production works when it comes to the development of systems. Because here we would also not want to just extract from people. And we're actually, I think, seeing that in quite a lot of care homes, that they're constantly being bombarded, and care workers to give some feedback to a new startup. So how do we do that in a way that's really meaningful? And there are some companies that have worked with us that have found new strategies and how they really involve a group of people who they are, trying to enhance their life with, and build them into the system right from the start, and then really also build something that is for them. So I think here we really need to understand more good practice, and we're seeing some of that. So that's really interesting. I think alone that there were tech companies who really wanted to and have shown a real commitment to be part of this co-production, to also make themselves quite vulnerable sometimes, because AI is a really emotional topic, and there are a lot of people who are really angry about it. And then tech providers are sometimes, feeling a little bit like they need to step back and they can't say anything. And there are a lot of them who came and worked, and they were really open to hearing of what some of the concerns are, and then created that tech pledge, which is all about, okay, how can we show some accountability here? How can we make sure that people trust us? And of course, here's a fine line, because sometimes you might also get tech providers very cynical. Unfortunately, we're seeing that though too in the world, who say, okay, well, we'll just come up with this ethics thing and it looks good, but we don't actually do it in practice, right? So it's all about also accountability mechanisms. So we're just working for the Care Summit. Actually, some of these tech providers want to come up with some good practice that we will then also share with the world. So that will be on the Digital Care Hub website too. So if you want to have a look at that, there'll be more.
It's a very, very interesting, good presentation. Can I just ask you about the views and input of people who use adult social care, whether you get much in the way of views and inputs from them, and if so, some idea of what they feel about it?
Yes, yeah, we do. So we've had quite a few people who actually rely on technology to live the lives that they are currently living. So there tends to be a lot of excitement, also positivity, right? Where they're saying, well, if we have the right technology that works for us, it can be life-changing for us. But on the flip side, there are a lot of concerns. First of all, that, a technology will be put into people's homes or into wherever they are, into contexts, and these systems don't work for them anymore. And then there is no choice anymore. So that loss of choice and control over how technology is being used in care, also some sort of replacement of technology with human connection, there is a real concern. And unfortunately, we're already seeing some evidence for that is actually happening on the ground, with one local authority, for example, who obviously I'm not going to name, but who've questioned a care home on their staffing levels, because they said, well, you've now got these AI systems that can predict this and that. So do you still need that much staff? So we are seeing some of this. So losing human connection, losing choice and control, being more isolated because of technology, and also just having tech that doesn't work. I mean, how often do we go to presentations where the presentation doesn't work, right? Or where we're trying to put something on our phone, it just doesn't work. Now, if you're relying on technology and it stops working for whatever reason, and you then don't get the help in the moment, that's a real problem. So these are some of the concerns, but generally there's also a lot of positivity around it.
I have a question online. I think you've touched on part of this. This is a question from Nazia, who says, this is very impressive work, but if AI models are already or will be implemented in the care sector, does it not create a service user dependency on it? And then they've touched on what the implications might be in terms of human connection and creating other disturbance within the system.
So that would, I would assume that that's relating to AI systems that are about communicating, so friends and so on. And I think that that's a really important concern, because we're also seeing that outside the care sector, right? That people are, yesterday I was actually at a really interesting talk and some really sad numbers around just how much time people spend with their AI companion, which is, I think, I have like 3 times as much as on TikTok, like 80 hours a week or something like that, right? Spending with an AI companion. And then in the end, also really kind of really getting involved, anthropomorphizing, so not really knowing anymore that you're not actually talking to a person, but that it's a chatbot, a system. So I think it's something we do need to be concerned about. And in care context, that would be a good governance. It would be a person-centered care issue. It would be a dignity issue. So I would have thought, that that's a real responsibility of also of care providers to make sure to know on what people are engaging with and how they're engaging with that. Of course, we've then got a privacy angle here to it. Like people can still make choices, if also in care context in a certain extent, depending on dementia and so on. But people still generally have choice to use these systems. But I would say it's a good governance issue, absolutely, in care contexts.
Dr. Green, thank you so much.
Thank you.